So Roly Romero just said that he wants to fight Manny Pacquiao next as his next opponent after that Ryan Garcia huge upset, probably upset of the year. Nobody really gave Roly a chance. I mean, people gave him a chance, like a puncher's chance, but in that fight, it was clear that he gained the respect of Ryan Garcia throughout that whole fight after that second round knockdown that he scored against Ryan. Dropped him with that double left hook. Boom, boom. Ryan went down against his own punch, which was crazy to see. But, you know, Roly Romero wants to fight Manny Pacquiao now. So that's crazy. It's just like, what does the welterweight division become, and what does it come to, honestly? At 147, if you told me that Roly Romero would be calling out Manny Pacquiao and Pacquiao would be returning to fight Mario Barrios in July for a WBC title, I'd be like, what are you talking about? But that's the state of the boxing world right now at 147. You know, a lot of guys are fluctuating up and down in weight, and then you have a guy like Manny Pacquiao. I think a big part of Pacquiao returning to the sport is maybe he's seeing all of the boxers and so-called fighters, you know, getting their paydays and not making it a real fight for the fans to enjoy, because Manny was always somebody that wanted to give the fight fans what they wanted to see, and that's why he's a legend at the end of the day. You know, even though head-to-head he wasn't able to beat Floyd, people still attach, you know, their names to each other. When you talk about Manny, you're talking about Floyd. When you're talking about Floyd, you're talking about Manny as well, because these guys were like 1A and 1B, because ultimately you had a villain, you had a superhero, and then you had somebody who, you know, was supposed to be the good guy. Floyd was a bad guy, and, you know, it's a more defensive fighter against a more offensive fighter. So it was just the perfect, you know, collision course for Floyd and Manny. That's why they were, you know, basically the stars of boxing. They were keeping boxing at its strongest, and now it's not really there, because all of these guys, you know, you talk about Devin, you talk about Ryan, Teofimo Lopez, Roly Romero, all these guys, and Tank, of course, and Shakur. All of these guys are talented, but, like, they're not fighting each other enough to show us any separation from each other. They're fighting other guys and, you know, losing to other guys, or, you know, having draws with other guys. So it's messing up the plans, and it's messing up, you know, our idea of how good these fighters really are, because we know Devin's good, we know Ryan's good, we know Tio's good, we know Tank's good, and Shakur, but they're not fighting each other. You know, if they're not going to fight each other, we're never going to really know how good they are, how great they can be, because there's no separation. You know, we have to see you fight each other before we can call you great, because you're all good right now, but the one that, you know, fights everybody else and is still at the top and has beaten everybody else, that's the one that's great. It's not the one that's, you know, beaten a bunch of people we don't care about. That's why resumes are so important. You know, you could have an O but not really beat anybody, and your record can be insignificant, and that's not what you want. But, you know, Roly and Manny, that's a really interesting fight. Like I said, like, I'm really shocked about what the sport of boxing has come to, especially in the welterweight division. I would have never envisioned that Pacquiao and Roly could potentially fight after a Barrios Pacquiao fight. You know, I feel like Manny's just at that age where it's going to be difficult for him to perform, you know, in general against any professional boxer, not only, you know, let alone a 147-pound champion. Mario Barrios, you know, Pacquiao did he picked the most beatable opponent. You know, if Pacquiao is fighting Barrios, he picked the most beatable 147-pound champion, in my opinion, because Barrios he's good. You know, he's going to pose some issues, because ultimately he's a pretty durable fighter, and, you know, he can take some punishment, he can take some shots, and, you know, he's rangy, he's tall, and, you know, like I said, it's going to be hard for Pacquiao to close the distance. But if there's one fighter he's probably going to be able to beat, it would be Barrios. But still, that's a really close fight for me, just, you know, based upon age. You know, Pacquiao, you know, he's going to go down as a way better fighter than Mario Barrios. There's no question about that. It's just, you know, at this point in Pacquiao's career, can he keep up with somebody who's still relatively young in the game? And you could call Barrios in his prime right now. You know, he's not really on the decline just yet. So at 147, I feel like Pacquiao, he's great. You know, he's great, but at this point in his life, he's just going to be too slow, in my opinion. You know, just judging from his exhibitions, who knows, maybe he can turn back the clock for this one. I just don't see any longevity in it, but I understand he wants to prove to himself that he can still compete against the best, and he wants to show people how great he is. And maybe he just feels like he needs to be in the sport of boxing for it to be more exciting, because obviously a lot of the best fighters, they're fighting the best, but we're not getting those exciting fights that we wanted or had anticipated, prior to, the drought of boxing. But we'll see what happens. Pacquiao, Roly, let me know in the comments who you guys would have in that one. I probably, favor Roly, I guess. Youth would be on his side, but still Pacquiao has the experience, and the last thing to leave is the power. So if he could get the respect of Roly, who knows what would happen. But, very interesting. Roly calls out Pacquiao. But thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll catch you guys on the next Nabs Boxing video. Peace.